Hello. Thank you for being here. There's like so many people. I'm like shocked. Wow, that means a lot. Thank you for coming out to this. My name is Nina Freeman. Thank you. You may have seen our game, Size Zero. We're showing it here. It's my first time in Spain. Very excited. It's beautiful here. We're showing our game. Thanks to everyone who's played it. And I gave a talk yesterday, so thanks to everyone who came to that. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me. So I'm gonna run a workshop today about paper mapping and gray blocking. I'll explain what that is as I get into it, but I should also kind of tell you a bit about my background and, also maybe I'll show you this video in a second. I forgot my first slide is a video. This is a game that Jake and I made together. Jake is also gonna help me with this workshop. We are making Size Zero together, and we've made a bunch of games together, and we both come from a background of making first-person 3D games. So the level design I'll be teaching you today is largely within that space, but I'm happy to talk about other kinds of level design too. I wanted to just show you a trailer of a game Jake and I made together, just so you can see some of our work to get a sense of who we are. I have like 10, 12 years in the industry now, and Jake has a similar amount. So yeah, we've been making games for a long time, specializing in narrative games. And I was also a level designer at Fulbright on Tacoma and Open Roads. So that's like my formal level design experience. But yeah, I'll show you this video of We Met in May, a game Jake and I made together. I don't know if I can play it from here though. So I might have to ask our friend over there, could you click on the screen to play the video? These things don't play it. Thank you. We'll see if it plays a YouTube video this time, which is what happened at my other talk. Yeah, it is. Here we go. Thank you. Cool. So that game came out a while ago.
Dirige al equipo en batalla como Leonardo. Idea planes astutos como Donatello. Gana de forma espectacular.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're good. Thank you. And we don't need to play this video yet. I'm going to talk a little bit first. Thank you for the help. So that was We Met in May. I wanted to share the trailer because it's actually really relevant to the workshop. In that game, it's not a first-person exploration game. It's sort of a collection of vignettes with each has a different mechanic. You obviously saw the nipple pinching one. It's like an FPS nipple pincher game. So that's fun. But importantly, the space that the game takes place in for a few of the vignettes is actually Jake and my old apartment. And the theme of the workshop is paper mapping and gray blocking places you remember. And this is something Jake and I have done a lot, where like we'll take a place that we've lived, for example, and try to make a game set in it, and we'll try to build that space out in 3D just from our memory. Although actually in that case we were living in that apartment, so we built like the apartment in our game while living in the place. So we actually skipped the paper map step for that part because like Jake just like walked around and like made it based on like literally what he saw. So that one was like a little unique. And actually we used the same exact model and layout for our game Last Call, which was the game we made after We Met in May. And this is a content warning for domestic abuse. It's a game about an experience I had as a domestic abuse survivor. And I'll show you the trailer for this so you can see the first-person view of this space that we built while we were living in it. So if you wouldn't mind playing the video, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much. and this is actually not a trailer, it's gameplay footage from the very beginning. This may be a repeat from the talk I gave if you were there, but for those who weren't, this is a game that you play like a first-person exploration game. You walk around the environment, but when that microphone icon pops up, you're actually meant to talk to the game through your microphone. And that's one of the mechanics. But I'm primarily showing it to you for this aspect of the game, which is the first-person exploration, looking through the boxes and being in the space. So the kind of level design that Jake and I focus on is really this like 3D first-person space. And I emphasize that because actually in level design, creating levels that work really well in a first-person game is quite different from creating levels that work well in a third-person game or in a 2D game, for example. But one thing all of those have in common, and this is kind of maybe a me thing, I'm like totally biased, but, oh, you too bad, yay. I'll continue after being too bad. I have to give it its space, thank you. So the common thread between all these things, oh, we can go back to the slides, by the way. Thank you. Cool, I'll go to the next one. Okay, so thank you so much. The common thread between making good level design, in my opinion, regardless of the game type, are like the little details that bring a space to life. So like I'm really into environmental storytelling. You know, if you've played like Prey or BioShock, games with 3D spaces where you walk into a room and you can like just see the story that the room has to offer by like looking at the things in the room. That's an element of level design that I'm really excited about. But we're gonna like step back and look at that one level like higher, or one earlier step in the process, which is just the layout of the space itself. So like, how do the rooms flow together? How do they connect? That's like really the first step before you fill the space with environmental storytelling, right? So this workshop will really focus on that first step of making a space that's interesting to navigate. But yeah, I think all of them regardless, like you can do environmental storytelling in all of these formats, which I think is really cool. And yeah, oh, could I get the slides back actually? I'm gonna go to the next one. I'm just gonna freestyle because I don't remember what my next slide is. But one other thing to know about my background is that for like level design stuff I'll talk to you about, my background is really in like immersive sim level design. A lot of the level designers I learned from like at previous jobs and stuff worked on stuff like BioShock. That's kind of why I mentioned that before. So just know that when you're learning about level design, like who you learn it from really like changes your priorities. And like immersive sim level design is a really specific thing. So just know coming into this that like that's my specialty. So yeah, anyway, I want to talk about paper mapping places you remember, because I think that level design based on real spaces you've been is a really inspiring place to start like trying any level design. Like it's awesome to come up with your own like fantastical space that you're making up out of nowhere. Like that's fun in its own way. But like think back to like your parents' house. Think back to like an apartment that you lived in. These are also spaces that often have really interesting level design just built into them by the architects that made them. We actually have a ton to learn as game designers from architects who are designing spaces that are meant to be lived in. So I think that's why I wanted to share this topic with everyone here, because it's something that I like to do literally for fun. I stream on Twitch, and I first did this kind of thing on there where I streamed and I drew a paper map of like my grandparents' house and then built it in Pro Builder on my stream. So like I've done this before just for fun. Oh, and actually here's a paper map. Obviously I didn't do this one on paper. I don't think paper maps need to be done on paper. But if you don't know what they are, it's basically just a 2D map of a space that you want to build for your game. So this is always where I start when I'm building a level, whether it's for a game jam or like a bigger game. I always start on paper, just in 2D. to help figure out the flow of the space. So this particular paper map is of a concert venue that I used to go to a lot. I used to live in New York City when I was in college, and I went to tons of shows at this one venue, and I had a lot of nostalgia for it. So I did one of these paper mapping streams, and I was like, I just want to paper map this concert venue and like kind of go back to what it was like to be there. Like, I had such fond memories of the space, and I wanted to paper map it to try and remember, like, what about the layout really made this space special to me? Why did I vibe with it so much? And one of the things I learned while doing this paper map is, like, this show space actually was on the second floor of a building, and it had this balcony on the outside that you could actually see the stage from. And I have all these memories of, like, drinking out on that balcony, like, where the crowd was a little less crazy, and watching the show from there. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, that is what made this space special to me. And I learned that by paper mapping it, which was like kind of a fun process. And this is a screenshot from the stream, just so you can see like a little bit of what a gray block looks like. And we'll get into more detail later with Jake about this part. But I do a lot of my gray blocking in Unity. I mean, there are other ways to do it, but I tend to use ProBuilder. In this case, I was just using like, I wasn't even using ProBuilder for this. I was just using cubes and like scaling them to build a space. And this is a screenshot of the balcony from that paper map. I wonder if I can go back. I can. So like, there's the balcony. And then the screenshot is of there. So you can kind of see inside. You can see the stage there. And I built it and was like, I put the little person there because I was like, that's me. Like, that's me at all those shows, like outside trying to get away from the crowd. And yeah, it was really fun to gray block it. Gray blocks are basically the bare bones version of a level. I think most game developers start with this, or I mean with the paper map, but then with this. Like all those fancy games you play, like all the AAA games like a Prey or a BioShock, like they all start just as these gray, plain spaces made out of cubes. Or like maybe slightly more complex if the person making it has 3D modeling experience. But for someone like me, it's just like Legos. Lego version of your level. That's gray blocking. So I wanted to share another paper map that I made for one of these streams I did. This was the apartment that I grew up in as a child. And this was, you know, my first time taking a place that I actually like lived in and paper mapping it, which I thought was really fun. I won't get into too much detail about this one, but I guess one thing that's a little different that I didn't mention before is that I find labeling to be really helpful when I'm paper mapping. So like I name a lot of the rooms. I actually, in paper maps, will like mark where certain furniture went, because like furniture actually really changes the level design a lot, because it, you know, player can't walk straight through a table unless I guess your game is about that. But usually the table has collision, right? So that changes the player's path. So I actually find in paper mapping, it's not always only about the space itself. It's also about the things in the space that are going to affect and change player navigation. So I think that that is another important element to keep in mind while you're paper mapping. And this is just a screenshot of the gray block of that space I was just showing you. Gray blocks I don't think need lighting like this, but you know, once I'm getting to the point where I might want to build out the level further, maybe start putting some art, or like thinking about, actually lighting itself is a really important level design tool. So using lighting to sort of like light certain parts of the player path and help guide the player using light. That's like a little bit beyond what we're going to talk about today, but I did want to mention it for, you know, people who are trying to get into gray blocking. Lighting is an important tool in that process as well for guiding the player. So I think this is maybe one of the last paper maps I wanted to show you. This is one of my grandparents' house. And I wanted to share this one because it's a multi-floor layout. I know a lot of people wonder like, oh, what happens when you paper map like spaces that have multiple levels? I think a lot of level designers probably do it in different ways. But for me, I just like draw each floor and like label things. And for example, there's like the label 2 upstairs and 2 first floor. My labels aren't very clear. They're clear to me, which is what's important. But yeah, I think that's usually more than enough for multi-level spaces, at least for my purposes. And you can barely see the screenshot. I didn't realize how dark it was, but it was of that paper map in gray block form. And here's the outside of it. So I wanted to share this just in case, I know a lot of you are developers, so you may already be really advanced, but in case anyone's never seen a game level from the outside before, this is what it can look like in gray block form. The interior of that is a fully built out gray block with all the furniture and stuff going on, but the outside always ends up looking messy because I'm a really lazy gray blocker where I take all my my stuff and I just will stretch it, and I don't care how it looks on the outside because the player doesn't see that. So they often end up looking kind of messy like this. It's the inside that matters. And there's just another screenshot of seeing through the window into the bedroom, just to show you that there's stuff in there. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, so I've been showing you paper maps and gray blocks of things that I actually haven't used in a game that I've shipped. Those were just gray blocks I made for fun. But I do the same process for the games that we're actually going to release. So Size Zero, the game we're showing here, is a game set in a department store, a clothing store. And in the process of paper mapping that was an interesting process for me because it wasn't a space we built a store that I had not been to, but I wanted to evoke that feeling of the stores that I grew up going to. So I'm a super research-oriented level designer. I literally, Jake and I went out to a department store we live near and took tons of pictures of everything we could find. And when I was paper mapping, I used all of those photos as visual reference for my paper map. So I know we're mostly going to be talking about paper mapping from memory, but I think that using photos as reference and actually going to the place is also sometimes a useful step in the process.
When we were going to these places, sorry, hi, it's me. When we were going to these places, at first I had the camera and I was taking pictures, but we were taking pictures in the women's section, and I was like, I'm kind of creepy here, and I had to pass it off to Nina.
Yeah, Jake helped me out with that, and that was really good. Oh, the other challenging thing about gathering photo reference at a place like this is I really wanted pictures of the employee-only areas, so we went super early when no one was around, and I sneakily was taking pictures through open doors. We were very sketchy, but it was worth it. So here's a drawing of one of the paper maps that I did using all of that reference material. And this is actually the first paper map of the level that you can play in Size Zero at our booth. So I wanted to share that. Okay, so I want to jump right into letting y'all start paper mapping, but I want to take questions first because I know you're maybe jumping into the deep end a little bit. Hopefully everything I just shared gives you kind of a good first idea of what you want to go for. And I think because y'all don't, maybe some of you do have computers, but since most of you don't, we're going to show a little bit of the gray blocking process at the end, but I think we're going to focus on you drawing the paper maps first.
Yeah, and yes. I was thinking that actually I could probably pull up MS Paint on this computer and start gray blocking something.
Yeah, we'll paper map too.
Or paper map it.
Yeah, exactly. And then Jake will gray block that.
Yeah.
When we're closer to the end of the workshop.
Yeah.
So yeah, does anyone have any questions about paper mapping in general before we get into that? And remember, the theme of this is paper mapping a place you remember. So an apartment you lived in, a store you really liked, your parents' house, whatever you want, big or small, follow your heart. Yes?
What about verticality?
Verticality, yes. So I'll go back to the slide. So when I paper map verticality, I draw each level as its own separate part of the paper map like this. You may have your own way you want to do it, but this is how I would do it. Cool. Does that?
I mean, more complex verticality. Imagine that you are drawing for example, a skate park that has a lot of ramps and half pipes and that kind of things.
Right. So I guess for me personally, I would still draw it top down like this, and like put blobs where I want those things to be and like label what they are, and think more about where the player is walking. So for example, if you have like a pipe shape, if the player can walk through it, you probably want to like draw that blob, label it, but then like you can come up with your own symbols for this. I would draw like a little arrow through it to indicate like this is a walkable space. Yeah. You could use a highlighter or a marker to mark the different levels. Totally. I'm going to show the other slide again. So in this paper map, I like used a couple different like colors to label things. The pink path is actually like the aisle in the store, like how there's an aisle in the middle of this. Those are the aisles, and then the light pink outside is where all the clothes in the store would be. And so there's no rules for this stuff. It's really like all about how you'll understand it when you like put the paper map down and come back to it months later, right? You kind of want to make your own language for it. So yeah, I do that kind of thing a lot, which makes my paper maps sort of somewhat unreadable to other people, but that's okay. And this one, the arrow at the top, that's actually a staircase, and that's why I drew an arrow. Only I would know that. But yeah, coming up with your own like paper mapping language is also helpful. Does that answer your question? Cool. Does anyone have other questions?
Hi.
Hi.
How do you balance like the utility of the level with the reality of the level? Like so if you're making a house that it's an actual house,
right.
But maybe it's not that useful for the kind of gameplay that you want. How do you balance that out?
Yeah, good question. So for the workshop, since we're paper mapping places we remember, my baseline assumption is that you're thinking about these paper maps in terms of like a first person, like walking through a space kind of game. But not every game has that mechanic, obviously. So sometimes the paper map does have to change based on what kind of player character you're creating, what kind of navigation scheme you have. Paper mapping for a level with swimming underwater is probably quite different from a game like Gone Home or something, right, where you have gravity and your character walks like a person. So that's sort of the preface to my answer. The full answer is that for me, when I'm paper mapping this stuff, I don't really worry about the utility of the space because I'm thinking about like what is the stuff in a real house. Like I want the player to feel like even if not every room has a purpose for the game, I want it to feel like a space that I might be able to walk into in real life. So this is just a personal interest of mine. Like I don't think that that's a rule for everyone. But for me, I really like the utilitarian aspect of a level where it like is built like you would experience it in real life. So when I'm building a house in a level, like it's gonna have a bathroom. I'm also the type where like you have to be able to click on the bathroom, but that's not, you have to be able to flush the toilet, but that's not part of paper mapping necessarily. But like it has to have a bathroom. The bathroom should probably be near the bedroom because that's usually where they are. And like I think a lot about stuff like that. And I think that helps it feel like a real lived-in space. And that's something I'm really interested in is like making levels that feel like, oh, someone really lived in this place. And then the game is about that character, right? So that's like my personal preference. But I think if you had the other preference where you only want your game level to contain spaces that are like relevant to the mechanics, for example, then like maybe you could start with a house that has everything you would expect it to have, and then like subtract. Like sometimes design by subtraction is really helpful, because paper maps usually don't end up just being one draft. I'll draw like a paper map 3 times, and sometimes that does mean like, okay, let's cut this room, let's cut this hallway, let's move a window over here. Like editing is also a big part of the process. So I think that's probably where you would start to trim things away to serve the mechanics of your game better. Yeah. Any other questions?
I see you use negative space that does not make very much sense in the real life. What is your stance on this?
So for this paper map, I'm assuming you mean negative space in terms of like the interior of the paper map, or do you mean the exterior?
It's like the top right corner where you have like some holes that normally in real life there would be just a wall.
Yeah.
You see.
So for the parts that are like scribbled in, I think I think I'm more thinking about like what's it like to walk through the space in first person when I'm playing the game. Like when I'm paper mapping, I'm usually trying to like picture it in my head and then like translate what I'm picturing into 2D. So I don't really worry about the outside of it and how things connect unless there is like a window or something that does reveal what like the other part of the space looks like. Once windows are involved, the level design changes a lot, and I'm worried about the outside more. But in this case, because this was a paper map for like a store without windows, I was just like drawing whatever I thought would look cool from the inside and not worrying about how things connected in a realistic way. So yeah, I think it depends on the type of space you're making. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Also, feel free to start drawing like while I'm answering questions. Like, you don't need to wait, but I want to answer everyone's questions too if you have them before you want to start. And if anyone needs like ideas or help, I don't want to like talk at you for this whole workshop because I want you to be able to like be in your head and draw. So like come up and ask me, and like I'll look at your paper map. Like we can just talk also, and I'll come back up here in I don't know like 15 minutes and we'll check in. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna use your phone to time.
There you go. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Hello, I'm back. Sorry, ooh, I feel like I woke you up. I wanted to say it's been about 15 minutes, and before I pass it to Jake for sort of like a hyper speed showing of gray blocking, I wanted to ask like if anyone wants to share like what they paper mapped, like what space you paper mapped. No pressure. In the back? Oh, I guess actually Jake has a microphone. He can run around and do that.
Who raised their hand?
Yay, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
What am I supposed to do? I show it to you or do I tell what?
Yeah, we can look at them. I think probably what we'll do, actually, yeah, for context, I'll have Jake show some gray blocking, and then at like the very end, if anyone wants to hang out and show me what you worked on, I would love to do that. But if you want to just share what your idea was for everyone to hear, then that would be awesome.
So I drew my mom's house because it's been a long time since I got there. And it has 3 blocks. I don't know how to say it. The problem I had is that it's not like a rectangular house. It has like spaces into it. And I didn't think about it when I drew the different blocks. So you have like a middle part that is not rectangular and the rest of the house is rectangular and doesn't really make sense because now that I think about it, you have like chunks of the house flooring if you translate this to a 3D space. Does someone want to talk to a microphone?
I can definitely look at it with you. It is like weird, isn't it, thinking about the layout of a house that you've been in, because sometimes you discover things about it that maybe in your memory don't make sense, but like when you start building it in 3D, sometimes those problems can be solved that way too. So I know sometimes I paper map and then like gray block and then go back to paper map. And sometimes that helps with that kind of issue. But yeah, we can talk after. Does anyone else want to share what idea they paper mapped? Yes. Yeah, you can speak. Yeah. I love that.
My high school used to be a very weird shape. Thank you. It used to be a very weird shape. It's like a perfect square, all white, very like basic looking classrooms. But then there's a really pretty garden in the middle that is blocked out by a glass wall. So I thought, okay, that feels like I just made that up. Like it's a great space. So I decided that I wanted to try to map it, right?
Very cool.
I thought it was quite funny that I remember things like factually, like I know the classrooms had to have enough room for 28 people, for 33 people, yet when I map it, I don't know how. How did they fit 33 people? And it's fun to like know, like my memory isn't perfect. So like I remember details, but I don't know where the hell they would actually fit in real life.
Totally, yeah. The memory part is interesting, especially like when you're going to spaces even further back or that you didn't go many times. It can be a challenge. So I don't want to run out of time for Jake, so I'm going to start passing things over to him. He paper mapped the barn at his parents' house along with you all, and I'm going to let him talk about that and gray blocking, and then at the end I can look at your paper maps.
Hi.
You should introduce yourself.
I'm Jake, the other half. So I gray blocked a barn, my parents' barn actually, and I can relate to what different people here said where things don't quite line up, because I've been there recently even, and when I was gray blocking it I was like, oh, you know, that there's more space for that door. And personally when I'm paper mapping I don't worry about that so much, because when I gray block it I'm gonna fix those problems, and also depending on what we're making, things might shift. You know, we might not make it exactly real, or the game might not need that, or we might need extra space, and so we're going to add an extra room somewhere. And so those things come later. They don't all happen in the paper map. So yeah, I'm going to just like try to gray block in Unity really fast, because I think we only have a few more minutes, this thing. So let me switch it over, and I'll do that.
Yeah. Time really flies. And even if we don't get to see like a full gray block here, I just want you to see like what a gray block environment looks like. I don't know like how technical everyone is in here. We're going to open up Unity, and we use ProBuilder to greyblock, which is a tool that is built into Unity. So that's what you'll be seeing here, and I hope that it maybe inspires you to make a 3D space of your own. Or I can talk through. Okay, I'll talk for him because his hands are full. So this is ProBuilder. There are certainly other ways to greyblock. You can use Maya or Blender. And I mean, if you're doing a 2D level, like you can do it in a different way. So it's all dependent on what you need. But what Jake and I have experience in are these 3D levels. So basically, he just made a cube and made it big to make a floor. And he made another cube, and he's going to make a wall. The beauty of ProBuilder or tools like this is that it really is like a lot like Legos, and you can just like stretch them however you want to create your space. Oh, and one thing that's helpful when you're gray blocking, we're not going to have that here, but we'll often import like a character model so that we have a sense of the player character's height, which is important because when you gray block, you want to make sure like doorways are tall enough for like your player to not feel either like too small for them, like a kid, or like you want to avoid the player being too tall and the doorway being too small. So sometimes putting a character in your gray block is really helpful for ceiling height and door size. So since Jake is doing sort of a live demo, I just want to ask if anyone like has any questions about this or about paper mapping in general. Is it okay if I answer those while you're doing this? Okay, cool. Because you can watch him do that, and I can answer questions. Anyone? Yes. Oh, do we have the microphone again? Oh, okay, yeah, you can yell.
How do you translate the process then when you, I imagine when you go to Blender to actually make the model, do you take these and go to Blender to modify them?
Actually, that's a Jake question because he's the artist, so I'm going to let him answer.
Sometimes I export them to get the scale of the object, like sort of the general box and size of it, if I've made it in ProBuilder. But sometimes, usually it's just for scale purposes. I don't usually take the model. I usually end up completely remaking it in Blender or Maya.
Any other questions? In the back. And I think we're probably out of time, so I'll take this as the last question, and then after I'll go outside and people can come by and talk to me and show me your paper maps. Sorry, this went by way faster than I expected. Yes?
Hi. So one thing I noticed on size 0, and I was probably just like projecting, is that some of the spaces weren't really Euclidean, right? So there's like spaces that change or are one thing, but then they become other. Do you actually plan on that during the paper mapping, and do you have any tools that you use and you want to share?
Sure. So for some of the like more surreal spaces in size 0, those came after the paper mapping phase. So we paper mapped the very like practical parts of the level, like the central store and stuff like that. And then when we were making the bedroom space, for example, that is actually based on my teenage bedroom. So that was like, we didn't paper map it. I kind of just built it from memory. But you know, a lot of, I mean, level design and making games in general, of course, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is iteration. So the paper map is really the jumping off point, and then we are always like allowing ourselves to just like jump straight into gray blocking in editor, like if we feel like we can just build it faster that way. So I'm not always strict with paper mapping everything. Sometimes we just like build it on the fly.